Welcome to TypeScript FM, the friendly podcast for TypeScript developers where we bring you news, updates, and interviews from the community with plenty of tomfoolery sprinkled in. I'm your host, Kamran Ayub, and I'm joined by my co-host and best bud, Eric Onerheim. Together, we're the two TypeScript fools. Welcome to the show.
Welcome to the show.
Welcome to the show. Hey, what's new with you?
What's going on with you?
Well, you go first.
Jinx.
You go first. You owe me a Coke. I have a Coke right here. You got to give me one now.
I also have a Coke right here.
What?
How about that?
Double jinx.
Double jinx.
This show is off to a good start.
That's right. Well, we have had a lot of sickness around, so I'm running on Dayquil right now. It is the water of life, Aqua Vitae. So there's that. I'm feeling much better now. Last week, I was feeling very rough.
Mm-hmm.
I think after we recorded last week's episode, I literally went to bed.
Well, I think you gave it to me because now I have the sniffles and stuff. So you gave it to me through the podcast.
Through the podcast, which would be pretty impressive for this virus to travel through the microphone to you, because I don't think I've seen you in person since.
Nope. No, I caught it from other family members who will go unnamed.
Yep, back to school. Well, we also had an exciting week on Excalibur. We had a brand new sample, Excalitrus, which is an Excalibur Tetris sample.
Nice.
And a new core contributor, Chris K., who contributed that sample as well.
That's cool.
They've been promoted to commit access. So huzzah for Chris, and he'll probably listen to this episode. So it's pretty cool.
So this sample will teach people how to make a Tetris game in Excalibur.
That's right.
With TypeScript. Woohoo!
With TypeScript.
That's cool.
Yeah. And my contribution to it was very minimal. I added Vim motions so that you can use, if you're a Vim person like me, you can move using the H, J, K, and L keys.
Nice. Love it.
Otherwise, if you're a normal human being, you can use the arrow keys.
Sweet. Well, like I said, I got a little bit sick this weekend, but last week was pretty awesome. I mostly worked on keep track of my games. So, as you know, I've been working on this playthrough tracking and completion feature. So you can not only track your playthrough, but then when you're done with it, you can mark it as complete. And I even support multiple playthroughs and multiple completions. So for people that like to replay games, you can actually track those separately, which is pretty cool, I think. I don't think many other apps do that. I might be the only one that will. But anyway, I was working on some TypeScript code to do that because all my front end is all in React and TypeScript. And I was dealing with enums. So the one thing I'll say about enums, so I've been using the enum keyword, and now we know, like, maybe I'm going to need to migrate away from that because I won't be able to use, like, type stripping, right, with that, unless I do the transform types. So what I did was I updated my code generation, which takes my C# models, like my view models and my domain objects, and transforms them into TypeScript interfaces and types. So I updated it so that now I output the string union of the different enum values, so I can import those and I can apply those as types. But then also, sometimes I need to like enumerate what those enum members are or like use them as values, like in a switch statement. And so I also export a map, which is just an object literal, and then use the asConst keyword to create an object literal constant that has my enum members in it. And that worked really nicely. So I'm hoping that maybe that is kind of my migration path. I could just replace all the usages of enum, which, because I'm using TypeScript, is really easy to do. I just delete the type, and then I'm going to get compiler errors all over the place. So,
hey.
Yeah, so I'm not going to do that right now because that's kind of some tech debt I'd like to tackle next, probably after I ship this feature. So anyway, that's what I worked on last week.
Well, let's get into the news for the week of September 15th, 2025.
Woohoo! And sadness.
Yeah, NPM is getting beat up again.
Oh, man.
Yeah. This time with Shai-Hulud, it looks like the same crew is coming at it again. At this time, they have engineered a literal NPM worm that if you get pwned, it goes and spreads itself to other packages by stealing your credentials and propagating itself through the registry, which is wild. I think it might be one of the first NPM worms that I know about for sure. But there's a great article about it on socket.dev. Always quality work there by socket.dev. Their engineers are top notch. But maybe embarrassingly enough, CrowdStrike was targeted in this one. So
Boy.
the CrowdStrike commit lint package was one of the ones that included malware.
CrowdStrike, if you remember, had its own kind of issue. Was it a couple years ago now, where they took down?
They managed to dodge that, and their stock is back up. I think.
Yeah. I don't know about that. Oh, by the way, if you're not up on your popular fiction, Shai-Hulud refers to the name of the worm in Dune.
Name for the sandworm.
That's right, Shai-Hulud.
While I am a huge fan of the Dune reference, I'm not a huge fan of malware.
No.
So at the time of this article's writing, there were 526 packages that are confirmed to be affected. There are probably more. You can check if you were affected by looking in your GitHub organization, because it creates a repo called Shai-Hulud. So there's a repo.
So they're doing it on purpose.
Yeah, no, they're definitely doing it on purpose. So they've self-named the worm, but there's quite a few repos that were impacted, including NGX dash, basically everything, a bunch of Remark stuff, React stuff, SWC plugin, component annotate.
Yeah, those are popular packages too.
Ton of stuff. So you should definitely, if you're hearing this and you haven't yet gone through your stuff, you probably should go check. And I think there was a note that said, if you downloaded this malware on a machine, you should consider it compromised.
Yeah, that's huge, right? Because basically, I have environment secrets in my environment variables. If I was hit by this, I need to rotate them all because they're all compromised, basically.
Yep.
I guess this brings up a good question. What could our listeners do to take action on this? To either help prevent this for themselves, like getting pwned by this, or what can I do as a developer? So one thing that I've done, thanks to Eric's suggestion in one of the last episodes, I downloaded the socket CLI, and it has a feature called Safe NPM, where basically you can configure it so that it automatically attaches itself to any npm command. But usually you would just do socket npm and then whatever command you're going to run, install my dependency. And then what it does is it actually scans for threats before installing it or updating your package lock JSON. So that is something that I've started to do now. So that is now my default sort of operating model if I'm working with npm. Then the other thing that we talked about is that pnpm in the latest release added that minimum release age cooldown setting. So you could switch to PNPM, and you could also set that in your package JSON or wherever your PNPM config is. And so that might help as well. Do you have any other suggestions?
No, I think that's exactly what I would go for. And then there's also, I think socket.dev also has a GitHub action that you can install that will watch your CI. And, it's all about defense in depth. Socket.dev kind of works like endpoint protection. And I'm not sure if they're doing looking for malicious types of behavior versus looking for known exploited versions. I think they are doing both. I'd have to actually go and read the product specs more. This is not sponsored, by the way. But in any case, you do want to have this kind of defense in depth. And then there's some other things you can do if you're an enterprise, doing
always running
package
things
mirroring.
Proxy. Yep.
Yeah. Doing your own maybe Artifactory or doing something like this, depending on your security posture. If you're all the way on I need to turn the screws all the way to 11, you could have your own NPM mirror and then pre-approve every package that developers can use. That's probably the purest insanity. That would be a really tough environment to work in because you need to have someone reviewing source code all the time for all of the many, many NPM updates. But there's probably a place in the middle there where you can limit your dependency graph, or you could do a full mirror and then just know if you've been pwned.
Mm-hmm.
Because then you can have logs of what your developers have downloaded, and then you could take action. So there's probably a defense in depth strategy here, especially with NPM. And I think the last thing I'll leave this NPM discussion with is a bleat from Gurgly Oraz. I hope I'm saying that right.
You might know him better as the Pragmatic Engineer in the
That's right.
Pragmatic Engineer newsletter.
Yeah. And he has a spicy bleat that says all the good that TypeScript has done for the Node ecosystem, NPM is undoing it. And I tend to kind of agree.
I know.
NPM has really, really taken its lumps this last 2 weeks.
Mm-hmm.
And I think we really need to look very carefully at package manager systems. And NPM is not the only one that could be susceptible to this type of attack.
But it's definitely having the biggest visibility into it.
Mm-hmm.
And we're going to talk, we have another spicy article we're going to talk about later in the highlights section, but I don't want to spoil it for you. It seems like you also had, in the show notes, you had a video too.
Yes, I also will recommend a video by Maximilian Schwarzmuller, and I hope I said that right. Again, a great follow on YouTube, but he talks a lot about what these NPM packages mean for us and, maybe our posture towards NPM in the future. So I definitely recommend watching that video. He kind of recaps a lot of this situation as well.
Cool. And you know what? I did remember one other thing you could do to help mitigate this is to go through your package JSON and make sure that you are using exact versions for everything and not the caret symbol, which will pull in any patch versions automatically when you do an update. And then the other thing is just to be cognizant whenever you see the package lock JSON changing to maybe take a look at it, which is actually a habit that we got into developing when I worked at Target because dependencies were a really big thing. Because if you change the dependency, you might be affecting production. So all package lock JSON changes always went through its own review process before getting merged. So that could be a habit that you implement on your team as well.
Awesome. Moving on from the NPM sadness, everyone should be very afraid when they type the characters NPM and install. But moving on to maybe some good news, WebAssembly version 3 is finally done. It is the new live standard, and it comes with a lot of really cool stuff. This really increases the capability of WASM to be a target for higher level languages like C#, Go, and other languages. Some deficiencies in original WASM that required a lot of workarounds are now being addressed by just WASM itself. So we have 64-bit address space. We have multiple memories. Contrary to popular belief, WASM applications were always able to use multiple memory objects, hence multiple address spaces. However, previously, that was only possible by declaring and accessing them in separate modules. This gap has been closed. A single module can now declare, define, or import multiple memories, directly access them. This is super useful for like static linking, that kind of stuff. It also paves the way to use separate address spaces, mainly for like security or buffering or instrumentation, that kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm.
There's garbage collection now, which is pretty slick. But yeah, lots of good stuff here. Definitely take a read. And if you are looking at doing WASM, we probably should do an assembly script show, which is a TypeScript dialect that compiles to WebAssembly.
Yeah.
So that could be cool.
Yeah, definitely. I think we do want to do that. It'd be great to have someone on who could talk about that. Hint, hint. Send us an email. Okay, moving on. Have you heard of the Ash framework, Eric?
I haven't.
Okay. So I hadn't either, but it's actually part of Phoenix and Elixir. So Elixir, you might know as a programming language. Phoenix is the backend server framework type deal. And then Ash framework is a framework that is built in Phoenix and Elixir. So anyway, Elixir is a pretty cool programming language. So the Ash framework has announced AshTypeScript, which you could think of as just like from PHP Laravel, the Wayfinder package that they released, where it generates TypeScript types and API clients based on your Phoenix and Elixir backend. So this is pretty cool because TypeScript and Elixir go really well together. Like Elixir is strict and TypeScript is strict. And so it's kind of a nice stack. So anyway, I'll link to the Substack for the Ash Weekly, where they talk about what's new in Ash framework. So if you are using Phoenix and Elixir, that's some good news for you. All right, a couple library announcements. So there is a popular package called ts-to-zod, which transforms TypeScript types and interfaces to Zod schemas. And in the past, it only supported up to Zod 3, but this past week, they added support for Zod 4. So now you can run ts-to-zod and generate Zod 4 schemas. So that should be exciting news to some of you out there. Now, the next one is a release that is related to a show that just came out last week that we did with David from Archetype. One of the alternatives that he mentioned is a library called Typebox, and it has similar goals to Archetype, where they want to create a runtime type system for JavaScript, and they just had their 1.0 release this past week. So there was a bunch of breaking changes, but it went from like 0.34, I think, to 1.0. So it is stable now. So if that sounds interesting, you can go check that out. We probably need to do a dedicated episode again on like Typebox. But one of the comments in the Reddit announcement thread asked like, what is the difference between, Typebox and Zod or Valibot? And the maintainer said, I think that the biggest difference is that Typebox is based on industry specifications first, is focused on high-performance server validation, and has fast, scalable type inference. I think on the face of it, to me, it seems like it's very similar to Archetype, so it might just be a matter of preference. I do know that Typebox focuses mainly on JSON schema-based validation, so you can give it a JSON schema and get types back and vice versa. So it makes it a lot easier to deal with JSON schemas, which I think could work pretty well with LLMs and OpenAPI and things like that. Plus, it does some cool stuff with remote schema validation, where you can give it the Zod types or Valibot types, and it is compatible with it and will still get you the type inference back. So anyway, it's pretty cool. And I know there's a lot of people in the Reddit thread that were really happy about this. So it's also a popular library. So you should go take a look at that too.
Definitely check it out.
Yeah.
All right, moving on to our community highlights.
SquiggleConf!
Yeah, that's right. SquiggleConf happened. And the live streams are still up as of this recording. So you go check them out. They're 8-hour recordings for day 1 and day 2. There are a ton of awesome talks in there.
Yeah.
I sat and watched all of SquiggleConf. So
that's awesome.
It's really good. It's really good.
So I watched Jake Bailey's talk on porting to Go, which was fantastic. But which other ones would you recommend that listeners check out? Because it's not just about TypeScript. There was a whole lot of other DevTool talks, right?
Yes. Yeah, definitely check out Jake Bailey's talk. But there was another one that I really liked. Let me refresh my brain. I liked the .NET Aspire one, which was very interesting to me. I had, what it reminded me of? I've kind of been on the periphery of .NET news for a long time because I've been kind of focused elsewhere. So this was kind of the best talk I've got about .NET Aspire and what that is. And it's, roughly speaking, if I were to summarize it and give it the pitch, it's like a automation framework for your various projects that you have and dependencies. So it's like a more DSL-y Docker Compose, but with all sorts of niceties like seeding a database or getting credentials or doing all this other stuff that you need to do.
It's kind of like having a private cloud local first that is running .NET, because it helps with the Docker Compose stuff, and it gives you a really great user interface to see everything running. But then it also does distributed logging and tracing, which is super cool, just based on the different Docker Compose services that you have and seeing how a single request can span, multiple services.
Totally. And what's really funny is looking at .NET Aspire, it reminded me of a thing that I actually did in my own company, which is in C# Make, which is called Cake. I did a very similar thing. We have an internal Aspire, if you will, to set up our own code bases, which is really funny. So it's definitely filling a need, especially if you've ever pulled down a project and you're like, oh God, how do I run this locally? this is some really useful tooling because it can just programmatically, you can codify how to run it locally. And if you build a culture of like, this is how you run it locally, then things just work, which is super nice. The other talk I remembered really enjoying quite a bit is TJ DeVries made an LSP live on stage.
What?
Which I thought was wild. That was so cool. He talked all about how to do the LSP protocol and where to reference the documentation there.
That's cool.
But I would definitely go find TJ DeVries' talk on doing LSPs live. There were a lot of great talks, but those were two that really stood out to me that weren't really necessarily like TypeScript related, but also very much like dev tooling related, following the ethos of Squiggle.
Yeah, that's what SquiggleConf is about, is like getting deeper into the dev tools, which is super cool. I came across a few different blog posts. One is from Federico, who goes by AzraelSec for security, and he wrote a blog post called Type Branding in TypeScript, and I really liked the post because he starts out saying like, I've heard about type branding and like how to create unique strings and branded types, but I just didn't understand what it meant, and like I don't get like why you would do that. So this is a great post if you're also in that same boat. If you're like, you keep talking about type branding, but I don't get it. This is what you should read, because he goes from end to end, like here's the problem that it solves, here's how to do it in like a way that is not great, like doesn't have a great developer experience, and then how TypeScript can help with that. So I do recommend that. The other blog post I came across is from Renato, and it's just kind of like a funny kind of cool hacks type of blog post, but it's about using TypeScript tuple lengths and not only like computing them, but using them to do like arbitrary arithmetic with TypeScript types. So like literally at the end of the post, he has a type where in the generic, you can pass a literal string that's like 12 plus 12. And then the type hint, when you hover over it, is like, here's the type 24. Like it does the calculation. And just using string types, which is like, yeah, it's pretty funny. So it's just more of like a kind of a fun, like this probably isn't very useful to anybody, but it's pretty cool if you want to do arithmetic and types. Okay, so the next post that I came across is actually just a post from roadmap.sh. And if you've used roadmap.sh before, it's pretty cool. They have different like roadmaps for different types of developers. So if you're like a front-end developer, they have a front-end developer roadmap. Now, if you're a TypeScript developer, they have a TypeScript developer roadmap. So you should go check that out, because what's great about Roadmap is that it's sourced from all like tons and tons of people. So it's like a crowdsourced roadmap, and it goes into a lot of detail, and it gives you like step by step. Here's every single resource that you can reference to like, become a TypeScript developer. So you should definitely go check that out. I think that roadmap.sh is one of the top starred repos on GitHub, if I remember correctly. So it's super popular. Okay, next up. Did you know that GitHub Actions, because of Node 22 and Node 24, can now run pure TypeScript GitHub Actions without a build step? And so this was posted by Brian Munzenmeyer, who maintains the Node.js website, and posted an example GitHub action that is just written in pure TypeScript and doesn't need any build step at all, and you can just reference it in your own GitHub workflow, and it'll just execute it. So that's pretty nice, because otherwise what you used to have to do, you'd have to create your TypeScript project and then build it, and then the dist files would be the files that you give to GitHub Actions to execute. But you no longer have to do that, so it saves a step. The next thing that came across my desk is another blog post by Evan Hahn, and it's why ts-ignore is almost always the worst option, and I would agree with that. So he's got some examples of when you might use ts-ignore and what you should use instead. And he does say there's one edge case when ts-ignore might be optimal, when you need code to run in two different TypeScript versions, and there's only an error in one version. That's probably one of the only use cases where ts-ignore would make sense. So if it's too long, didn't read, in descending order of preference, this is what Evan recommends. Number 1, actually fixing the type error. That would be the best thing to do. Number 2,
you should fix the type error.
Number 2, use any. And number 3, use ts-expect error. So you can go read his blog post for why he thinks that. but I would tend to agree with that recommendation.
Awesome. Another blog post from Matthew Brown talks about how to use the native test runner in Node with TypeScript and React. So definitely check that out if you are in that boat. Did you know that Node had a native test runner? We might have talked about it in the past, but now you can use the import TSX flag in Node to handle the TypeScript compilation and do the TypeScript JSX deal. You can do the import global JS DOM register to provide that, fake DOM for the React components. You can do the experimental transform types. And I think now you don't need the experimental anymore. And then you can also get the experimental test module mocks to enable those mocking behavior. And you can use the -- test to use the test runner. And it's what you would think. It looks just like you're writing normal Mocha tests.
Mm-hmm.
It looks awesome.
Cool.
And there's low boilerplate. The article is short and sweet, and you'll love it if you're in this situation. Definitely check it out. It might save you a lot of time and configuration if you can go ahead and use the native test runner. I have a library watch, which is a combinatorial option parsing library for CLIs by Optic. It's a type-safe parser in TypeScript for expressing CLI constraints in code structure and not in validation logic, which could be useful to you if you're doing a CLI. And they have this whole Y Optic, which has a really great example of how to make these constraints simple by making very Zod-like or even Valibot-like objects for your CLI, which is super nice. So you can just kind of set these things up and build your own CLI parser really fast.
Yeah, it's pretty cool because if you think about how you would normally do CLI option parsing, you would be doing if statements and figuring out, okay, here's the positional argument and this is what it is. It's all sort of procedural, whereas this you declare it up front. So you declare the type of object schema that you want for your options, and you give it the short flag and the long flag. Here's the value that it should be by default, etc. And then you just say type config equals infer value type of my options parser, and you got your type. So you got your complete type, and it's type safe. And then you can run the parser against whatever args are coming in from Node for whatever, or your runtime or whatever you want, and they get validated. So I think this is pretty cool. This definitely makes it a lot easier to do lots of options. So for more complex and production CLI applications, I think this is pretty cool.
All right. I have a library watch for a new library called @traversable/Valibot, which adds a whole bunch of helper methods to your Valibot validation. So it's actually pretty slick. So if you import this in their example, they have import VX from traversable Valibot. You can do things like VX.check. So you can make a Valibot schema. You can turn it into a type guard, which is pretty neat. You can do VX.deepClone, which converts a Valibot schema into a deep copy function. You can also do deep equal, which you might take a guess at what it does. You can also do VX.toString, which can convert a Valibot schema into a string, which is useful for testing or code gen or sanity checking your things. You can also go .toType, and it'll shoot out a TypeScript type, which is pretty cool because it preserves schema metadata as JSDoc annotations, which is pretty slick. That's pretty neat. But yeah, very neat stuff. And if you are a user of Valibot, this might be a thing for you.
Cool. We got a couple other tool watches, and then we'll get into our little discussion here. But Eric, if you could run Code Sandbox local first, meaning that it runs on your machine and that the project that you're developing is actually just running on your machine and doesn't even need a server, that would be pretty cool, wouldn't it be?
That would be pretty cool.
Yeah. Okay. So that is what this tool does. It's called FullStacked, and it is a local first app development environment. And they don't describe themselves as if Code Sandbox was local first, but that is how I would describe it. But basically, you can think of FullStacked as a progressive web app. It's not technically a progressive web app, but basically it runs on your machine. It's a full app development environment, but it also has like bindings to your local machine, like similar to like Electron, where you can interact with Electron APIs to do stuff outside of Electron. You can do stuff with FullStacked outside of FullStacked, and that's through their WASM bindings. But what's cool about this is that they've already integrated TypeScript Go and ESBuild, and it's all just running into the web browser through WASM. So it's pretty cool. And then if you want to share it with someone, like Eric, if you wanted to run my FullStacked app, I would just send you the URL, and then you would run it through the FullStacked environment. So you'd run it locally on your machine. So you would not go to like, I would not have to deploy it to like a running server. So it's almost like being able to like npm run or npm install like my app locally, and you'd be able to run it. And that doesn't mean that your project can't communicate with remote services. It can, but it runs local first. So I think that's pretty cool. So this is kind of a nice way if you're kind of more into the local first movement. I would definitely take a look at this. This is like brand new. So it's still like heavily in development, very beta. If you check out the UI, it's very beta, but it's pretty cool. So I would definitely go take a look at that. And they do have some docs already set up. So it walks through like, here's how to create your project. Here's how it works. Here's the architecture and stuff like that. So super interesting to see where that will go. Next up, we've got a new game engine, actually. This is a retro 3D game engine, and it's forked from the Doom 3 BFG engine. So it's written in C++, but what's cool is that they added TypeScript scripting support, because in the original Doom 3 BFG engine, you would use something called DoomScript, which I'm not familiar with. And so they replaced that with TypeScript scripting support. And remember in the previous episode, we were talking about Lua to TypeScript or TypeScript to Lua. They might be doing that. I don't know for sure. But for however they did it, you can write your scripts in TypeScript and then write your regular 3D game code in C++. So again, this is brand new and experimental. It's called Roguestrad or Roguestrad. I don't know how to pronounce it. But anyway, it looks pretty cool. So just something to check out.
Yeah, it sounds like a D&D monster.
Yes.
Or a Magic the Gathering card set.
Okay, should we move on to the spicy take that we both read and we have some comments on?
Let's talk about the spicy take.
All right, so this is from the Motion Engineering blog, and you might have already seen it, but I think it's worth talking about. It's called Moving Off of TypeScript. We love you, TypeScript. And it's by Chander Ramesh, who's the CTO at Motion. And so the blog post describes sort of, they've been running into some pain points running full stack TypeScript. And the too long didn't read is that they're going to move to .NET and C#. So that's pretty interesting. And so I do want to read a little bit from in the Hacker News comments. There was a lot of people that are like, yeah, this makes sense. And actually, like, who in their right mind would use TypeScript on the back end, which is kind of funny. But this is definitely worth talking about. So one of the Motion engineers chimes in and they said, this is a pure backend change, so the front end is going to remain powered by React and TypeScript with no plans to change it anytime soon. But the main pain points with TypeScript have become more obvious as the team has grown and the code base has resulted in a multitude of different models representing the same thing. So like they're using Prisma and they have models that represent things, plural because Prisma generates a ton of variants for the different read-write scenarios going in and out of the database. They've got Zod models for open API generation. They have Zod models for deserialization, where they use JSON binary, JSON-B. They have data transfer object models, DTO models, at the boundary of their server. And then they have additional front-end payload models that wrap those DTOs. So they're saying a developer building a simple API endpoint to do a read will often end up writing a handful of models for the same entity to move it back and forth. A lot of this work simply ends up being related to the loss of runtime types, requiring a lot more modeling work, creating a spaghetti of Zod and types. So lots of paper cuts in day-to-day and increasingly difficult to get otherwise competent engineers onboarded. So they're not under the impression that this is a silver bullet, like that C# is just going to make everything better, but they're obviously running into some pain points. And so this is pretty interesting because, fun fact, both me and Eric use .NET backends with our TypeScript frontends. So this is something that we're pretty familiar with, and it was a decision. I wouldn't say it was like super intentional. Like we both have come from .NET backgrounds. And in my case, this was for my own product. I was just used to writing my backends in .NET. At that time, like 10 years ago, I was not like a Node.js developer. Like I'd been doing front-end development and it switched from JavaScript to TypeScript, but it wasn't like I was doing at, where we were working, where we weren't doing like Node.js backends. So it just made sense to me to like write my backend in C# and .NET. And then on my front end, I use React and TypeScript. So very, very similar to like what these guys are going to move to. And then I don't know, like, what's your story of like why you're using Angular and TypeScript, but you're also using a .NET backend?
I mean, some of it's history, right? Like our company was a .NET shop. So if we were a different shop, it'd probably be a different story. But as far as like Angular goes, the Angular to the ASP.NET pairing matches pretty well because they have similar design languages. It's model view controller. You have dependency injection, that kind of thing. So a lot of it looks very similar. So that's why the Angular kind of thing maps to, C# and, C#'s web framework, ASP.NET by extension. The concepts are very similar. Now, one advantage of the, like using C# on like a backend context like this is you do have that runtime type information and runtime type guarantees where, for example, TypeScript, you don't have that. You don't have runtime type information, which is probably what necessitates a lot of the Zod validation between the boundary of the front end TypeScript and the back end JavaScript, right? Because at that time, at runtime, it's JavaScript and you don't have any type information. So you have to write your own type guarantees, and rightly so on the server because you want to make sure from like a security perspective and a data consistency perspective that it's correct. So
and I would go back to something that Liren taught us about for TypeScript security on the back end is like HTTP parameter pollution and then prototype pollution. Those are not things that you need to worry about if you have a runtime type system like with C#, right? Like there's no way there's no prototypes in C#. There's just absolutely no way that the attacker is gonna be able to do anything by sending me different types of payloads.
Now, there is one way they could attack you there is like, depending on how you're marshaling JSON, there have been plenty of exploits in JSON serializers and deserializers to execute arbitrary code. So there are things there, where I think there was a JSON.NET vulnerability years ago to that effect, where they could go and execute arbitrary code.
Yes, that's true, because
on the server.
In .NET you have this thing called reflection, which allows you to do that meta type stuff where you can mess with types, and I think it will affect the runtime. So you do have to be careful about some of that stuff. So that's interesting because, I would say you still have to worry about security. There's different things you got to worry about, though. So that's one aspect of it. The other aspect is for pure performance reasons, like .NET is really, really good. And this is not like your Pappy's .NET, right? So I think a lot of people have this, they have this impression that it only works on Windows or whatever, but that's not the case. Like .NET has been ported now for almost 10 years or something like that.
That sounds about right.
They're at .NET 10 now. And so .NET Framework, that was .NET Framework 4 or whatever. And that's what I'm on, like personally, but that is legacy .NET. The new modern .NET is all cross-platform, runs on Linux, so it's super cheap to run, and it's extremely fast. And you can go look at, the benchmarks the .NET team has done, but it's like way far and above anything you're ever going to see in any kind of JavaScript engine. So for pure performance reasons, that's one reason to do it. And that seems to be one of the motivations in the blog post they were talking about, like to scale up. They were looking at that performance because, as we say here, make sure you measure and, you don't let the performance tail wag the dog, right? So if you don't need that performance, you're going to be fine with like full stack TypeScript. Now, the other side of this is that the developer experience is a bit better with full stack TypeScript, right? Because you can actually share code and it's just a lot easier to go back and forth. But there is like a flip side to that, because I've experienced this working with Next.js and also recently with Quick, is that sometimes when you're looking at a module it can actually be kind of hard to determine, is this running on the server or is this running on the client? But when your backend is separate, either if it's Java or C#, it's really easy to know what that boundary is. But it's at the expense of like, I can't just import code, from one to the other. Because with Next.js and with like Quick or whatever, I can write code that runs on both the client and the server. And as long as I'm clear about that with my naming or the way that I organize my project, that's super nice to be able to like share code. Because like right now in my React app, I have code that is basically a duplicate of some server-side logic to do things. So it's like there's still trade-offs even doing this. Like, so I wouldn't take this as like, oh yeah, you should just not use TypeScript on the back end. But it's like, how is it going to work with your company, your team layout, your scale, taking into account everything you would normally take into account. And one of the things that they say explicitly is like, we love TypeScript. This is not like saying we don't like TypeScript. It's just like, it's not working for us with the way that we work and the way that our architecture is like right now. And we think that there might be a better option.
Yeah. I think they've kind of outlined a lot of good reasons to do this move. Certainly, they're not losing anything from like a type perspective, right? Like, well, maybe they are. Like the C# is not as expressive as TypeScript, for example. But I don't know if that's the problem here, right? They're marshaling plain old JavaScript objects across the border. That's the problem.
Yeah. All right. Do we want to get into some of your cool links?
Yeah, I have one cool link today.
Ooh.
And that's from Jake Bailey, otherwise known as Joke Bailey. But they have a real banger post from Gwern.net. It's a blast from the past. This will really remind you of the satanic panic with D&D. The title of the article is Your Son a Computer Hacker? And it's got some real funny ones in there, which is number 1, has your son asked you to change ISPs?
Yes.
2, are you finding programs on your computer that you don't remember installing?
Yes.
3, has your child asked for new hardware?
Yes.
4, this one made me crack up. Does your child read hacking manuals? And on there's works of fiction like Neuromancer and Snow Crash.
Yes.
Which I thought was really funny. Does your son use Quake?
Yes.
Is your son becoming argumentative?
Yes.
And this was also really great. Is your son obsessed with Linux? It's Linux spelled wrong.
Okay.
They have the I and the U transposed.
I guess I would answer no to that, at least when I was a teenager. But
yeah.
But yes to everything else.
Yeah, there's a lot of really good stuff in here. It's
funny.
It's quite a giggle because I think I actually check yes for every single one of these.
That's funny. Yep. Yep.
I thought it was really funny, but that's all I got.
Awesome. Well, I got 2 useful tools that I came into contact with last week as I was working on stuff. So I have a use case where I want to let people share their game completions like on social media. And I've noticed that what people will do is they will share like the box art and then they'll add like, here's how much, here are my trophies that I got, or here's how much I completed, or they add some commentary to it. And I thought, why not just make that easier? And so I used a library called DOM to image more to render DOM elements as images. And this is pretty cool. So like I can render in the DOM, it can dynamically react to whatever they're entering for their completion info. And then I can put like the game box art, the game title, the year it was released, how many hours they spent on their playthrough. And I can add other metadata, and then they can just press a button to like share it, and it'll download the image version of whatever is in that DOM node. And it works pretty cool. And it works with like the CSS that I've applied to it, including like box shadows and absolute positioning and everything seems to just work. So I think there are definitely edge cases where it doesn't work. I don't think it's compatible with Safari, but I have to double check that because what it actually is doing is it's creating an SVG and using something called a foreign object to actually embed the DOM tree that you're snapshotting into the SVG. And then they export the SVG to like a PNG or a JPEG or, vector. You can export as an SVG as well. So it's not going to work in all cases, but it was like a pretty nice, like, I just want to get this thing done and be able to offer this feature to, browsers that support it. And so I added that and it works really nicely.
That's so cool.
But it's super cool because now I can just like, as I'm completing my game, I can be like, yeah, I want to share it with my friends or I want to share it with my followers. Okay. And then the other thing I wanted to recommend was if you have a need to do like a CMS, but you don't want to have to go through all the rigmarole of like signing up for a service and relying on like a third party to manage your database and then integrating that into your site, there is a CMS called Pages CMS, which just runs on top of your GitHub. And so like you can write your stuff in Markdown, but it provides like a visual editor and a visual interface for you to manage your pages, but it's all powered through your GitHub repo. So it's making changes in Git. So you can also make changes in Git and it updates your CMS because they're not two separate things. Your GitHub is your database for this Pages CMS. And so it's supposed to work really nicely with static site generators like Astro, 11T, those kinds of things. So I have been thinking about it as maybe my CMS for keep track of my games because I don't have one right now. And I think I would like one for like the homepage and blog posts and marketing landing pages and stuff like that. And I think we've even been thinking about it maybe for Excalibur to make it easier to update the homepage or have our contributors write blog posts. Like we can actually have them do it in a visual interface, which would be kind of cool. So anyway, just something to check out if you have a need like that.
Yeah, I think I'm going to deploy this tool for an organization I volunteer for because we have a lot of non-technical users that just asking them to use Git is not going to work out very well.
Yep.
So I think if we can have like a CMS front end and then use Git as the database like this, it's going to be a huge win.
Yeah. This was recommended by someone who works with clients like that. And they were like, I'm just tired of, I don't want to have my clients have to sign up for, these CMS services and like have to teach them how to use their interface and all that kind of stuff. So this is like hassle-free, zero, like there's config, but essentially zero config, and then uses Git as a source of truth. So pretty cool.
Awesome. I think time for our long goodbye.
Yeah. My long goodbye is like, well, there's two things, I guess. One is we love TypeScript as far as like it's a really nice tool that solves a nice problem. Like I love TypeScript on the front end. Don't get me wrong. I think it's awesome because even last week as I was working, I had to refactor a whole bunch of things and it would have just been a nightmare to try to refactor that if I was just writing in pure JavaScript. So having TypeScript on the front end is so much nicer. But at the same time, like you don't have to use TypeScript all over the place, like use the right tool for the right job. I like having .NET on the back end. There's a lot of things to like about it. There's trade-offs too. Like I wish I could have my C# cake and TypeScript cake and mash them up together. I think that'd be sweet. Like I wish that C# was as expressive as TypeScript, especially with union types. That's like the one thing.
Yeah.
That's the one thing I want.
Me nuts. Well, the sugar, like with like the null, like a nullable int.
Yeah.
Like I keep thinking it's going to work like TypeScript, but it's actually like sugar for like a struct in C#, and it drives me nuts every time.
Yep. And there's some people screaming probably that why not just use F#? But there's trade-offs with that because F# is kind of how you would say infectious, meaning that if you adopt F#, pretty much everything you use with it needs to be F# because F# does support like unions. But then if you try to use an F# package with C#, it doesn't usually end up working very well. So there's like, even inside the .NET ecosystem, there's weirdness with like F#. So I respect F#. It's cool. You can do really cool stuff similar to like you could create Doom and type. You could do Doom and F# types if you want to. You can do meta type level stuff similarly, but it's just like practically it's really hard to do .NET and F# unless your whole team is like bought into that ecosystem. But otherwise, I mean, what's your takeaway?
Well, my takeaway is more from a security lens. And that's, I think, more and more I'm viewing zero dependencies as like a feature.
Yeah.
Just because you control your own destiny.
Yep.
I mean, you do wind up building a lot of things yourself, but maybe that's okay. Maybe building some of the things yourself, maybe you don't need a dependency for something. Maybe copy pasting the is number implementation is good.
That's actually one of the downsides, of .NET, where the library ecosystem, you definitely don't have as many options as like NPM, but at the same time, there's like well-known good libraries for doing stuff.
Yeah.
And you want to work with SQL Server, you're probably going to use Entity Framework, And then there's just a lot of stuff that you kind of have to bring into your project and then customize so you own the code. So you still have dependencies. Like I still have a lot of dependencies, but a lot of them are Microsoft dependencies, or they're like third-party SDKs, like working with services, much like a less attack surface for like third-party dependencies.
That's right. So I think my final note is we really need to think about our dependencies and package managers, not just NPM, but across the board. And with that, I've got to sign off.
Sounds good. See you later.
See you. Bye-bye.
Hi, everyone. This is Kamran. I just wanted to thank you for listening to the show, and we hope you enjoyed the episode. If you want to see the show notes, you can check your podcast player or go to typescript.fm, where you'll see a list of all the episodes. If you enjoyed the show, tell your friends, and please rate it on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, because that's how the show grows and gets discovered by more people. If you want to suggest news or a project that should be covered, or just want to say hi, email us at feedback@typescript.fm. If you want to follow us on social, we're both active on Blue Sky. I'm at Comronicus.com, and Eric is at EricOnerheim.com. You can also follow the show directly at TypeScript.fm.